The cold had a way of telling the truth long before people did. On a gray November afternoon in 1879, when the wind swept across the plains outside Sheridan, Wyoming territory, every living thing hurried toward warmth except one weary woman leading a single Jersey cow through the drifting dust and frost. By sunset, one choice would change two lonely lives forever. Some folks believe a home is built with logs and nails. Others learn that a home begins the moment one stranger decides another stranger is worth saving. Evelyn Harper had repeated the same sentence for nearly 4 miles. Each step across the frozen trail had worn the words deeper into her heart until they felt heavier than the rope in her hand. She had promised herself she would speak plainly. No tears. No pleading. No shame. When she finally reached the weathered ranch at the edge of Cotton Creek, she stopped beside the gate and drew one slow breath. The Jersey cow beside her nudged her elbow, searching for another handful of grass that wasn't there. "There now, Daisy," Evelyn whispered. "Just one more minute." The ranch yard was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of an axe striking wood. A tall man split another log near the woodshed before noticing movement at the gate. He rested the axe against the stump and wiped his hands on his worn coat. His name was Nathan Brooks. Most people around Sheridan called him dependable. Others simply called him quiet. At 40 years old, he owned more acres than conversation. He looked first at the cow. Old habit. A rancher always judged livestock before anything else. The Jersey was thin after a difficult autumn, but her coat still shone beneath the dust. Her eyes were bright. Her udder was full. She had been cared for by someone who loved her. Only then did Nathan look at the woman. Her boots were cracked. Her shawl had been patched so many times that little remained of the original cloth. The wind pulled loose strands of chestnut hair across her tired face, yet she stood straight despite the exhaustion written in her eyes. She wasn't asking for pity. She was trying to bargain. Before courage deserted her, Evelyn spoke. "I'll trade you my milk cow for a roof over my head." The words echoed across the quiet yard. Even the horses lifted their heads. Nathan didn't answer right away. He studied Daisy once more. Then he looked back at Evelyn. "You walked all this way to give her away." His voice wasn't suspicious. It sounded almost saddened. Evelyn tightened her grip on the rope. "She gives good milk, nearly 4 quarts every morning. She's gentle, never kicks. I raised her from a calf." Her voice stayed steady until the last sentence. That one almost broke. Nathan stepped closer. Not toward the cow. Toward the woman. His hands stayed where she could see them. "I lost my own milk cow at harvest," he said quietly. "I'd have reason enough to take yours." She waited. Every bargain had another sentence. Every kindness she'd been offered since spring had hidden something behind it. She knew that lesson too well. Instead, Nathan asked one simple question. "When did you last sleep somewhere warm?" The question caught her completely off guard. She stared at him without speaking. Finally, she answered honestly. "I don't rightly remember." Nathan glanced toward the northern hills, where dark clouds were gathering. Snow would arrive before nightfall. Anyone who had lived long enough on the frontier could smell it. He looked back at her. "You can keep your cow." Evelyn blinked. "I'm sorry." "You heard me." He nodded toward the barn. "The stall's empty. Your Jersey can have it." She frowned. "I said I wanted to trade." "I know. And I don't take charity." "I know that too." Silence settled between them. The wind rattled the fence. Somewhere inside the barn, a horse stamped its hoof. Nathan removed his hat and turned it slowly in his hands. "I've got a spare room beside the kitchen." She waited for the hidden price. It never came. "You can stay there." Her stomach tightened. "Nothing comes free." "Maybe not." "So what do you want?" Nathan met her eyes without looking away. I don't want anything. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because nobody had spoken those words to her in 8 long months. Since her husband died, every offer had carried invisible strings. The merchant had promised free flour if she'd spend evenings alone with him in his office. A freight driver had offered rides into town that always ended with wandering hands. A ranch foreman had offered steady work that somehow included sharing his cabin. Every favor had been a bargain she never agreed to. She had learned to hear the price before hearing the promise. Now this stranger stood before her asking nothing. It frightened her more than cruelty ever had. Nathan noticed the uncertainty filling her face. You don't have to decide standing in the cold. I do. No. He pointed toward the barn. Your cow's shivering. Evelyn looked at Daisy. Only then did she realize the animal had begun trembling. She had been so busy protecting her pride that she hadn't noticed. Slowly Nathan opened the gate. Not forcing. Simply waiting. If tomorrow you still don't trust me, he said, you can leave before sunrise. That sentence settled somewhere deep inside her. A man who planned no trap had no reason to fear tomorrow morning. After a long silence, Evelyn walked forward. Nathan stepped aside instead of leading her. It was a small thing. Yet it mattered. She passed through the gate first. No hand reached for her. No fingers brushed her shoulder. Only Daisy's hooves crunched softly across the frozen ground. Inside the barn, warm hay covered the floor. The empty milk stall had been swept clean that morning. A bucket hung neatly on its peg. Nathan noticed Evelyn looking at it. My old jersey passed in August. I'm sorry. So was I. He smiled faintly. Funny how attached a man gets to a cow. Evelyn surprised herself. So does a woman. For the first time that day, both of them smiled. It disappeared almost immediately. Still, it was there. Nathan spread fresh hay into the stall. You'll milk her yourself. I always do. I won't touch her unless you ask. She looked at him carefully. You really mean that? I do. Daisy stepped into the stall as though she had already chosen it. The old cow lowered her head and immediately began chewing hay. Evelyn reached out, resting one hand against Daisy's neck. Only then did the weight she'd carried for months begin slipping from her shoulders. She turned away quickly before Nathan noticed the tears gathering in her eyes. He noticed anyway. He simply pretended he hadn't. Instead, he busied himself fastening the gate. There's stew inside. I'm not hungry. I wasn't asking. His tone carried just enough dry humor to make her look at him. It'll get cold. She followed him toward the house. The cabin wasn't large, but it was cared for. Firewood had been stacked neatly against the wall. The porch had been swept despite winter approaching. A lantern already glowed beside the front door. Inside, warmth wrapped around her like an old quilt. She stopped just beyond the doorway. She had forgotten what a real home smelled like. Fresh bread, coffee, wood smoke, soap. For one dangerous moment, she imagined Thomas walking in behind her, smiling the way he used to after a long day's work. The memory struck so suddenly that she had to grip the back of a chair. Nathan quietly set another bowl beside his own without saying a word. He didn't ask about her husband. He didn't ask why she was alone. He simply waited. After several silent minutes, Evelyn finally sat. Neither of them spoke much during supper. Oddly enough, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. Outside, snow began falling. Large white flakes drifted across the dark Wyoming sky. Nathan glanced through the window. You arrived just ahead of it. Evelyn followed his gaze. Had she waited another hour, she and Daisy might never have reached the ranch. She lowered her eyes to the steaming bowl before her. For the first time in months, her hands weren't shaking from cold. They were shaking because she had almost forgotten what safety felt like. Later that evening, Nathan carried a small oil lamp to the spare room. "The stove works." She nodded. "The blanket's thick enough." Another nod. "If you need anything." He stopped himself. "You know where I'll be." He closed the door without another word. Evelyn sat alone on the edge of the bed. The room was simple. A rocking chair, a quilt, a small dresser. Nothing fancy. Yet to a woman who had slept beneath a leaking roof with frost collecting inside her kettle, it felt grander than any hotel. She reached into her satchel and removed one small wooden cross. It was the only thing she had kept after selling nearly everything else. Holding it tightly, she whispered into the quiet room, "I hope I did the right thing." The wind answered outside. Somewhere in the barn, Daisy let out one soft, contented moo. Then another sound reached her ears. Voices. Low voices. Men's voices. She moved carefully to the window. 3 riders had just entered Nathan Brooks' yard. One of them pointed toward the house. Another laughed. Nathan stepped onto the porch alone. Even from inside, Evelyn could see something in their faces that made her stomach tighten. The snow continued falling as the strangers dismounted. And before a single word reached her ears, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her past had found her sooner than she ever expected. The 3 riders did not hurry toward the porch. Men who came with honest business usually announced themselves before they crossed another rancher's yard. These men took their time. Snow settled across the shoulders of their coats, while their horses stamped impatiently in the growing drift. Nathan remained on the porch, with one hand resting lightly against the post. He looked calm. That calmness worried Evelyn more than anger would have. She eased the curtain aside just enough to see. The tallest rider removed his hat. His beard was touched with gray, and a long scar crossed one cheek. His name was Marshal Edwin Hale. The other 2 were local deputies. Relief passed through Nathan's face. "Evening, Marshal." "Evening, Nathan." The marshal glanced toward the barn before looking at the cabin windows. "Heard you've got company." Nathan nodded once. "I do. Folks in Sheridan have been talking since noon." Nathan gave the smallest smile. "They usually do." The marshal sighed. "I figured I'd hear the truth before I listened to another story." Nathan folded his arms. "The truth is simple. A widow came asking to trade her last milk cow for shelter. I told her to keep both." Marshal Hale studied him for a long moment. "I figured it'd be something like that." One deputy chuckled quietly. "The whole town's already married you 2 in their gossip." Nathan's expression never changed. "They're welcome to gossip." The marshal leaned a little closer. "That's not why I came." Nathan looked at him carefully. "What then?" Marshal Hale lowered his voice. "Silas Crowley rode through town yesterday." Nathan's eyes narrowed. The name meant something. Evelyn noticed it immediately. He was asking about a widow with a Jersey cow. Inside the bedroom, Evelyn's fingers tightened around the curtain. Her breathing stopped. She knew that name. Silas Crowley. A cattle buyer with polished boots, expensive gloves, and a smile that never reached his eyes. 8 months earlier, after Thomas Harper's funeral, Silas had arrived at her homestead claiming he wanted to help. Instead, he had spent weeks trying to convince her to sell everything she owned. When she refused, his kindness slowly became pressure. When pressure failed, rumors followed. By autumn, she had learned one painful lesson. Silas Crowley rarely accepted the word no. Outside, Nathan's voice grew quieter. "What does he want with her?" The marshal shrugged. "He didn't say. But he was offering money for information. Nathan looked toward the glowing cabin window. Nobody here knows anything. Marshal Hale gave a small nod. I hoped you'd say that. He adjusted his coat against the wind. Just keep your eyes open. I always do. The marshal tipped his hat. Merry Christmas if I don't see you again. You too. The three riders turned their horses and disappeared into the snowy darkness. Nathan remained standing on the porch long after they had gone. Only when their lanterns vanished beyond the hill did he return inside. He found Evelyn waiting in the kitchen. She hadn't gone back to bed. You heard. It wasn't a question. She nodded. I know him. Nathan quietly hung his coat by the door. I guessed as much. She stared into the fire. He wanted my land. Nathan pulled out a chair but didn't sit yet. Tell me only if you want to. For several moments, Evelyn said nothing. The flames cracked softly inside the stove. Finally, she spoke. Thomas bought that quarter section because the creek never ran dry. Nathan listened without interrupting. Most folks thought it wasn't worth much. But Silas believed there was coal somewhere under those hills. Nathan slowly sat down. I've heard those stories. He offered Thomas money before Thomas died. And after, he offered me less. Nathan frowned. Less. He said a widow should be grateful anyone wanted it. The room grew quiet again. He kept coming. Did he threaten you? No. She shook her head slowly. That would have been easier. Nathan looked confused. He smiled. She met Nathan's eyes. Every visit he smiled. He'd compliment my cooking, my fence, my gardens. Then he'd remind me that winter kills lonely people. Nathan's jaw tightened. He never touched me. He never raised his voice. He just kept waiting for me to become desperate. Nathan understood. Sometimes the cruelest people never shouted. They simply waited. You think he knows where you are? I think he always finds out. Nathan looked toward the frosted window. Then he'll come here. Evelyn immediately stood. I'll leave before sunrise. Nathan looked up. No. I won't bring trouble to your ranch. You didn't. He'll make it yours. Nathan smiled faintly. Evelyn. She stopped. I've lived on this land 15 years. The winds tried to chase me away. So have floods. So have grasshoppers. So have blizzards. He stood. I don't scare easy. She lowered her eyes. You don't owe me this. No, I don't. He walked to the stove and added another log. But decent folks don't measure every kindness by debt. His words stayed with her long after they both went to bed. Morning arrived wrapped in white. The storm had covered every fence rail and rooftop with fresh snow. Evelyn woke before dawn out of habit. She dressed quietly and crossed to the barn. Daisy greeted her with a soft nudge. There you are. The familiar routine steadied her heart. Warm milk struck the bucket in gentle rhythm. Outside, dawn painted the eastern sky pale gold. Nathan entered carrying fresh hay. He paused when he saw her. You've done this every morning for years. She smiled without looking up. Twice a day. My father used to say cows like routine more than people do. Nathan laughed softly. He wasn't wrong. For a few peaceful minutes they worked without speaking. It felt strangely comfortable, as if the silence itself had become a conversation. After breakfast, Nathan hitched the wagon. I'm heading into Sheridan. She looked up. I'll come. You don't have to. I need thread. And flour. And lamp oil. He nodded. Fair enough. The ride into town took nearly an hour. Snow sparkled across the open prairie. Nathan drove while Evelyn watched the landscape slide past. She realized something that surprised her. She wasn't nervous sitting beside him. She hadn't felt that safe beside another man since Thomas. When they reached town, conversation slowed as people noticed the wagon. Eyes followed them. Whispers spread. Mrs. Bell, who owned the mercantile, greeted Evelyn kindly. It's good seeing you again. Thank you. I heard your butter's the finest in the county. Evelyn smiled politely. I hope to prove that. Across the room, two women whispered behind sacks of flour. One glanced directly toward Nathan. The other toward Evelyn. Neither bothered lowering her voice enough. That's the widow. He took her in. I heard she brought a cow. I heard she's staying there. Nathan pretended not to hear. So did Evelyn. But pretending didn't stop the words from hurting. After paying for their supplies, they stepped back into the cold street. Nathan loaded the wagon. I'm sorry. She looked surprised. You didn't say those things. No. But you still heard them because of me. Evelyn looked across the snowy street, where children laughed while chasing each other. No. She answered quietly. They would have talked no matter where I stayed. Nathan smiled. Probably. As he climbed into the wagon, another voice called out. Morning, Brooks. Silas Crowley stood across the street. Perfect black coat. Fresh shave. Clean gloves. Not a speck of mud touched his boots. He smiled exactly the way Evelyn remembered. Like a man already certain of victory. Her heart dropped. Silas tipped his hat toward Nathan. I hear you've become something of a hero. Nathan didn't answer. Silas looked toward Evelyn. There you are. She remained silent. I've been worried. Nathan finally spoke. I doubt that. Silas ignored him completely. Evelyn, you've still got legal papers needing your signature. I'll handle my own papers. Of course. His smile widened. I was only trying to help. Nathan climbed down from the wagon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stood beside Evelyn. Close enough that everyone watching understood she wasn't alone. Silas noticed. His smile faded just enough to reveal irritation. You know, he said calmly, people in town are beginning to wonder. Nathan folded his arms. About what? About how long a respectable widow can stay at another man's ranch. The street fell quiet. Even the horses seemed to stop moving. Nathan looked directly into Silas's eyes. They can wonder all they like. Silas chuckled. Careful. Rumors have a way of becoming problems. Nathan answered so quietly that only those closest could hear. The only problem I see is a man who mistakes gossip for power. Silas stared at him for several long seconds. Then he smiled again. I'll see you both soon. He turned and walked away without another word. Evelyn watched him disappear into the crowd. A chill settled over her that had nothing to do with winter. Because she knew that smile. Silas Crowley only smiled like that when he already had another plan. If you believe kindness deserves protecting, let me know in the comments. Sometimes the quietest people carry the greatest courage. As Nathan guided the wagon home through the falling snow, neither of them noticed the lone rider keeping his distance along the ridge. But the rider wasn't watching the road. He was watching Nathan's ranch. And before another week had passed, someone would try to take far more than a piece of land. For 3 days, the ranch settled into a quiet rhythm again. Snow covered the fields like a clean blanket, hiding wagon tracks and old scars alike. Before sunrise, Evelyn milked Daisy while Nathan broke the ice on the water troughs. By noon, she churned butter beside the warm stove, and Nathan repaired fences buried beneath drifting snow. Neither of them mentioned Silas Crowley. Yet both thought about him. Nathan noticed Evelyn glancing toward the road whenever a horse passed. Evelyn noticed Nathan checking the gate twice every evening before locking the barn. Neither wanted to worry the other. Neither fooled the other either. On the fourth morning, Nathan returned from the north pasture carrying a folded letter. I found this nailed to the front gate. Evelyn wiped flour from her hands. There wasn't anyone here. No tracks except one horse. He handed her the paper. There was no signature. Only a few short lines. You can't hide forever. Sell the Harper land before New Year's or you'll lose much more than property. Evelyn read it twice, then quietly folded it again. Nathan watched her face. You know whose words those are. She nodded. I don't have to see his name. She carried the letter to the stove. Without another word, she fed it into the fire. The paper curled black and disappeared beneath the flames. Nathan frowned. That's evidence. It isn't. She looked at the burning ashes. It's exactly what he wants. What do you mean? He wants me frightened. He wants me counting every shadow. He wants me believing I'm alone. Nathan rested one hand on the back of a chair. You're not alone. Those 4 words filled the kitchen with a warmth the stove could never match. For the first time since Thomas's death, Evelyn believed someone meant them. 2 days later, Sunday arrived bright and bitterly cold. The little church outside Sheridan stood surrounded by fresh snow. Families filled the wooden pews, brushing white powder from their boots. Nathan and Evelyn entered separately. Not because either of them cared what people thought. Because it felt respectful. Still, everyone noticed. Mrs. Bell smiled warmly and slid over to make room beside her. It's good to see you out again. Thank you. You've been missed. Across the aisle, whispers began almost immediately. She's still staying at Brooks' place. I wonder how long. I heard they're planning a wedding. I heard he's only helping. I heard something different. Evelyn kept her eyes on the preacher. The old words about kindness, mercy, and truth somehow sounded louder that morning. When the service ended, people gathered outside beneath the bright winter sun. Children chased one another between wagons. Neighbors exchanged pies and preserves. Nathan loaded supplies into the wagon, while Evelyn thanked Mrs. Bell for a loaf of fresh bread. Then another wagon rolled into the churchyard. Silas Crowley climbed down wearing another expensive coat. He smiled at everyone. He shook hands. He looked like the kindest man in Wyoming. Until he reached Evelyn. I've been trying to speak with you. I've had nothing to say. You may after today. Nathan stepped closer. Silas noticed. So protective. Nathan answered calmly. Only respectful. Silas laughed softly. Respect is expensive these days. Then he reached into his coat and removed several folded papers. I've purchased 2 neighboring claims beside the Harper land. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. You had no right. I bought them legally. He shrugged. The owners were happy to sell. Nathan understood immediately. Silas wasn't buying land. He was surrounding it. One piece at a time. Soon Evelyn's quarter section would become nearly impossible to work alone. Silas smiled at her. You'll change your mind eventually. She met his eyes without flinching. No. His smile faded. We'll see. He returned to his wagon and drove away. Nathan waited until the sound of wheels disappeared. Then he looked at Evelyn. You still want to keep that land? She looked toward the distant hills. I wanted to. Nathan noticed the change in her voice. Past tense, not present. That evening, the wind howled around the ranch house. Inside, Evelyn sat near the fire, holding the little wooden cross Thomas had carved years before. Nathan quietly repaired a broken lantern across the room. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. When Thomas was alive, Nathan looked up. He dreamed that land would belong to our children. Her fingers brushed the carved wood. We never had children. The words hung in the room. He blamed himself. She smiled sadly. I blamed myself. Nathan set the lantern aside. I'm sorry. He told me something before he died. She stared into the fire. Land is only dirt until it becomes someone's home. A tear slipped down her cheek. I've been trying to protect dirt. Nathan didn't interrupt. She continued. I thought keeping that quarter section meant keeping him. It doesn't. The words surprised even her. She had never spoken them aloud. Nathan rose and quietly poured 2 cups of coffee. He placed one beside her. Without saying anything, he sat across from her. Sometimes silence carried comfort better than advice. The next afternoon, Marshal Hale rode onto the ranch. His horse was covered in snow. His face looked troubled. Nathan met him outside. What happened? The marshal climbed down. I need a word. They stepped into the barn away from the wind. Evelyn continued feeding Daisy, but couldn't help overhearing pieces of their conversation. A false petition. County office. Claims she's living here unlawfully. Trying to force an investigation. Nathan's voice remained calm. Can he do that? He already has. Marshal Hale removed his gloves. The county commissioners will come inspect the ranch after Christmas. Evelyn's heart sank. For what? The marshal turned toward her kindly. To decide whether anyone's violating territorial housing rules. Nathan frowned. She's a paying guest. I know. Marshal Hale sighed. They know. But paperwork has a way of becoming trouble when enough people push it. Silas wasn't trying to frighten Evelyn anymore. He was trying to use the law itself. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He stood alone on the porch beneath a sky filled with stars. Fresh snow reflected the moonlight across the empty fields. He heard the cabin door open behind him. Evelyn stepped outside carrying 2 blankets. You'll freeze. So will you. She draped one blanket across his shoulders. They stood quietly looking across the sleeping ranch. Finally, Nathan spoke. I've been thinking. About the inspection. He nodded. I don't care what people say. She looked at him. I do. You shouldn't. I know. She smiled faintly. But I still do. Nathan leaned against the porch railing. When my mother was alive. He stopped. Evelyn waited. She used to tell me something. What? Character doesn't grow during storms. It gets revealed. Evelyn looked toward the barn where Daisy rested peacefully. I think she was right. Nathan smiled. So do I. For the first time, neither of them felt like strangers sharing a roof. They felt like 2 people standing on the same side of a difficult road. Not because either had asked for it. Because life had quietly placed them there together. The next morning, Evelyn made a decision. Without telling Nathan, she walked into the spare room and opened the small satchel she had carried since leaving her old homestead. Inside rested one final keepsake. Thomas's silver pocket watch. It no longer worked. Its value wasn't measured by time. It was the last thing she owned that connected her to the life she had lost. She held it tightly for several minutes, then wrapped it carefully in cloth. When Nathan returned from feeding the horses, he found her pulling on her coat. Going somewhere. She forced a smile. Into town. What for? She hesitated. To sell something. Nathan's expression changed immediately. What are you selling? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because if she told him the truth, he would try to stop her. And she had already decided. If sacrificing her final memory could save Nathan from the trouble she had brought to his door, then that was a price she was willing to pay. If this moment touched your heart, don't forget to like this story and tell me in the comments. Would you have made the same sacrifice for someone who showed you kindness? As Evelyn disappeared down the snow-covered road, carrying the small wrapped bundle beneath her shawl, neither she nor Nathan noticed someone watching from the distant cottonwood trees. Silas Crowley smiled to himself. Everything was unfolding exactly as he had hoped. Or so he believed. The morning air was sharp enough to sting Evelyn's lungs as she walked toward Sheridan with Thomas's old pocket watch hidden beneath her shawl. Every step felt heavier than the last. She had carried that watch through every hard season since the day Thomas died. It had stopped ticking the same week he was buried. She had never found the heart to wind it again. Now she intended to sell it. Not because she wanted to, because she believed it was the only way to keep Nathan from paying the price for helping her. Back at the ranch, Nathan stepped into the spare room to leave fresh firewood beside the stove. The room was empty. He noticed the open drawer, the missing bundle. Then he saw the note resting neatly on the pillow. He unfolded it carefully. Nathan, you gave a stranger warmth when the whole world had turned cold. I cannot let your kindness become your burden. I'm going to settle my own troubles before they become yours. Thank you for reminding me that good men still exist. Evelyn. Nathan read the letter twice, then quietly folded it and slipped it into his coat. Without another word, he saddled his horse. By the time Evelyn reached Sheridan, the town had begun filling with Christmas shoppers. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children laughed outside the bakery. Church bells echoed across the snowy streets. She walked straight to the jeweler. An elderly man with silver hair looked up from his workbench. What can I do for you, ma'am? She slowly unwrapped the pocket watch. I'd like to sell it. The old jeweler picked it up gently. He opened the cover. His expression softened. Belonged to someone important. My husband. He nodded. I can see that. After examining it quietly, he looked back at her. It's worth more than you think. She smiled sadly. Everything worth keeping usually is. Before he could answer, the front door opened. Nathan stepped inside. Snow still clung to his coat. He looked at the watch, then at Evelyn. You left without waking me. She lowered her eyes. I had to. No. His voice remained calm. You thought you had to. The jeweler sensed the moment and quietly moved toward the back room, giving them privacy. Nathan stepped closer. I read your note. I didn't want you following me. I know. She swallowed hard. I won't let you spend your savings because of me. I already decided what my savings were for. They were for your ranch. He smiled gently. They still are. She frowned. I don't understand. Nathan looked directly into her eyes. My ranch stopped being just mine the day you walked through the gate. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes. You shouldn't say things like that. They're true. I've already lost one home. I won't lose another because I was too proud to accept help. She shook her head. I can't keep taking. Nathan reached into his coat and unfolded her letter. You know what I noticed? What? You thanked me. She nodded. But nowhere in this letter did you trust me. The words struck her deeper than any argument could have. Nathan continued softly. You trusted me enough to sleep under my roof. You trusted me enough to care for Daisy. You trusted me enough to laugh again. So trust me now." The silence between them lasted several long moments. Then Evelyn slowly wrapped the pocket watch again. She handed it back to the jeweler. "I'm sorry." The old man smiled kindly. "I was hoping you'd change your mind." 3 days later, the county commissioners arrived at Nathan's ranch. 2 officials, Marshal Hale, and nearly half the town, eager to witness whatever might happen. Silas Crowley stood near the back with the same confident smile he always wore. The senior commissioner opened his ledger. "Mr. Brooks, we've received complaints regarding unlawful occupancy and improper arrangements on this property." Nathan nodded. "I know. We'll hear both sides." Before Nathan could speak, Evelyn stepped forward. "I'd like to say something first." The crowd fell silent. She stood straight despite the cold wind. "My name is Evelyn Harper. I came to this ranch with nothing except one Jersey cow. I offered that cow in exchange for shelter. Nathan Brooks refused to take her." She paused. "He gave me a room. He never asked for payment beyond what I freely offered. He never treated me with anything except respect." She looked toward the townspeople. "You've all heard stories. So have I. But stories aren't truth." Her voice grew stronger. "I churn butter. I mend clothes. I keep the kitchen. I pay my way because I choose to. No one has ever forced me." Marshal Hale watched quietly. Several neighbors nodded. Mrs. Bell stepped forward. "So does the whole church know it?" Another voice followed. Then another's. "I've bought her butter. I've seen her work. She's honest." One by one, people who had once whispered began speaking the truth instead. Silas's smile slowly disappeared. The commissioner closed his ledger. "I've heard enough." He looked directly at Silas. "It appears these complaints were filed without merit." Silas stepped forward. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." The commissioner interrupted him. "You've wasted county time for a personal dispute." Marshal Hale folded his arms. "And I believe that's something the sheriff's office should discuss with you." For the first time, Silas Crowley looked uncertain. He glanced around. No one defended him. No one met his eyes. He quietly climbed into his wagon and drove away. No dramatic shouting. No fight. Only a lonely man leaving with the same empty smile he had carried into town months before. Justice arrived the frontier way. Truth simply outlasted deception. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Snow melted into rushing creeks. Green grass returned across the valley. One afternoon, Evelyn stood beside her old quarter section. Nathan waited a respectful distance away. She looked over the land Thomas had once dreamed about. Then she smiled, not because she was remembering the past, because she had finally stopped living inside it. A young couple from Iowa had recently arrived with 2 small children and very little money. The husband carried the same hopeful look Thomas once had. Evelyn sold them the land for a fair price. Not the highest price. The right price. As the papers were signed, she quietly whispered, "I hope this place gives you better years than it gave us." The young wife hugged her without saying a word. Sometimes gratitude needed no language. With the money from the sale, Nathan expected Evelyn to buy another homestead. Instead, she surprised him. One morning, a large wagon arrived carrying a brand new cast-iron cook stove. Nathan stared at it. "Evelyn," she smiled, "you've cooked on that smoky old thing long enough." He laughed. "You spent your land money on my kitchen." "Our kitchen." The words escaped before she realized she had spoken them. Both of them fell quiet. Nathan looked at her with the same gentle patience he had shown the day she first arrived. Evelyn, she smiled through happy tears. I think I've finally learned something. What's that? A house keeps out the weather. She reached for his hand. But a home keeps out loneliness. Nathan held her hand carefully, giving her every chance to let go. She didn't. Instead, she stepped closer. I came here trying to trade away the last thing I owned. You wouldn't let me. He smiled. No. You kept giving. So did you. She laughed softly. I don't think I noticed. You gave this ranch laughter. You gave it fresh butter. You gave Daisy someone to argue with every morning. She laughed again. And you gave me something I thought I'd buried with Thomas. What was that? Tomorrow. Nathan's eyes filled. I was hoping you'd say that. They were married that May beneath the wide Wyoming sky. Neighbors gathered beneath blooming cottonwoods. Mrs. Bell baked the wedding cake. Marshal Hale stood proudly among the witnesses. Even the county commissioner attended, smiling as though he had known from the beginning how the story would end. Daisy grazed peacefully beside the fence, occasionally lifting her head as though making sure everything was proceeding properly. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, the old Jersey let out one loud moo. Laughter spread through the crowd. Even Nathan couldn't keep a straight face. Evelyn laughed harder than anyone. It was the kind of laughter that only comes after surviving a season you thought would never end. Years passed. Children arrived. Then grandchildren. The ranch grew. Every evening, fresh butter still rested on the family table. The old chipped crock remained on the kitchen windowsill long after anyone needed to count pennies. No one dared throw it away. It reminded them where gratitude had begun. One snowy evening, nearly 40 years later, Nathan sat beside the fireplace, surrounded by grandchildren eager for another story. One little boy pointed toward the old photograph of Daisy hanging beside the mantel. Grandpa, tell us again about the cow. Nathan smiled toward Evelyn. Her hair had turned silver. Her eyes had not changed at all. He wrapped one weathered hand around hers. It all started because your grandmother walked 4 miles through the cold. She offered me her last milk cow for a roof. The children leaned closer. Nathan chuckled. I told her to keep both. Evelyn squeezed his hand and smiled. No. The room grew quiet. You gave me shelter. You let me keep my cow. But the greatest gift wasn't either of those. The youngest granddaughter looked up. What was it, Grandma? Evelyn looked around the room filled with family, laughter, warm bread, and the quiet peace she had once believed she'd never know again. Then she answered softly, He showed me that kindness isn't something you earn. It's something brave people choose to give. And when it's given with an honest heart. She looked at Nathan. It keeps growing, just like Daisy's family did. Outside, snow drifted gently across the old barn, where generations of Jersey calves had been born. Inside, warmth filled every corner of the house. Not because of the fire, because one lonely widow had once knocked on the right door, and one lonely rancher had opened it without asking for anything in return.